Hello, I'm Faye, and today, before it's too late, I want to give you the 8 books that I read in February. A very, very satisfying thing has happened. I only read books that I own in physical copy this month. So I'm going to work my way up from the book that I liked the least all the way up to my absolute favourite. I've refrained from giving star ratings as every book almost has reasons why I like and dislike it, and I don't want to hand out loads of 3-star ratings without them really conveying my feelings about the book. So I'll start off with a very popular book that has been on many a TBR of mine, TBR lists of mine. I've meant to read this for a long time. It's a memoir, and that's Educated by Tara Westover. I was really disappointed in this book, even though it's not a bad book. Tara Westover writes about her experience of growing up with sort of extreme survivalist parents that happen to be Mormon. I've seen this pegged as a book about Mormonism. I don't feel like it is. Yes, a lot of their beliefs are grounded in sort of this fundamentalist Christian worldview. That is at its core just very patriarchal, sexist, conservative. But I was hoping this book would be more about how Tara Westover breaks free from this family that doesn't believe in formal education, and she ends up going to Ivy League universities, working on her own PhD, very much enters an educational elite and breaks with her family. We don't get that much of that, and that's why I was disappointed. We get a lot about her abuse that she experienced growing up, both physical and psychological. And while books like that can really pull you in because they are so horrific and you really empathize with the author, that's not what I wanted out of the book. It reminded me a lot of, is it called The Glass Hotel, a memoir that I read probably sort of 10 years ago, which is also about basically neglectful parents and how the child, the author of this memoir, has to sort of find their own way of life, and that develops much later on in life. Disappointing for me, but it is so well loved by so many others, and it is a fast read. The chapters are very short. We almost go chronologically. Tara Westover is very aware of how her memory of certain events may be flawed. She points that out, which I thought was very authentic. But I actually didn't need that caveat. When reading a memoir, I realize that it is through the eyes of the author, and I don't need this repetitive nod towards other people having experienced the things differently. Check it out if you are still interested. Most people, I feel like, have already read this if they are interested. For me, this was a bit of a disappointment. The next one, as was Educated, was a buddy read, and I think that's the only reason that I ended up actually enjoying the reading experience of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, albeit not really liking the book. I picked this pretty copy up from a second-hand bookshop a while back, and a friend of mine is putting in great efforts of reading classics this year, predominantly written by women. And we just happened to both have this copy. Mansfield Park is about our main protagonist, Fanny, who goes to live with her aunt's family. And we basically see her grow up, and we get to roll our eyes at her more well-to-do family and the hijinks they get into and the gossiping and dating in this world that Jane Austen takes us into. She writes so well. You laugh so much about the subtle, biting commentary of snooty, upper-class English people. But nothing happens. The ending wraps up really quickly after quite a long book, and is ultimately quite unsatisfying because timid, shy, always good, slightly boring Fanny just ends up with what ultimately will be a timid, shy, ultimately good, fine for her, happy end in the end. So I found this a really, really boring story. It's the second Jane Austen I've read. I've read Pride and Prejudice, which I thought was amazingly well crafted and a story that actually has you invested as well. So I don't know, maybe this was the sort of brain fart of Jane Austen's, and I will read other books that she has read because this can't be my lasting impression. I would really like to hear what you thought of Mansfield Park. I've heard more people say that I should push on and that this is Jane Austen's worst. But it was very funny writing messages back and forth with my friend, just trying to decide who was the absolute worst character in this. Not worst as in written poorly, but just there are so many horrible people in this. Next, I have a book that has a really, really thrilling plot. Is a horror book that I really want to venture in, which is a genre that I want to venture in more, but I didn't gel with the writing style of The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is a Indigenous American author, which I thought was really interesting. The setting is a bit different to the sort of stereotypical horror plot. We follow a group of friends who am I going to spoil this if I say that? I'm going to try to vaguely say these 4 friends, 10 years after going out on a hunting excursion on Indigenous land, start getting haunted. The story's really scary. The first third, I actually felt a little scared, as you should when reading a horror book. But then it switches and follows other characters from the friend group, which I just didn't get that invested in, and the ending drags on for such a long time and goes on so many tangents of describing a sort of chase scene that I really just wanted it over. I wanted it done with, which is such a shame for a premise that is done really well and discusses questions of discrimination towards Native American people, and that meshed in a horror novel I thought was so smart, and its own voice as author as well. So I'm actually really disappointed that this one missed the mark for me. Next, I reread Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling, which is the second in the Harry Potter series. I'm rereading these this year with my friend Anna, which is really fun. She has reread them more recently. For me, this is the first time since reading them as a child. And the second in the series for me was a bit too much of a repetition of what we learn in the first book. I also thought the sort of climax and plot is built up much in the same way. I did really enjoy certain aspects that Anna pointed out to me that were the reason why she liked this one quite a lot. For a large bulk of the story, Hermione can't help Harry and Ron, so we actually get to sort of see that they can also figure out something without her helping her, and Harry Potter is a sort of real true hero in this book, which is nice because obviously he is our main character as well. There's the amazing introduction of Dobby the house elf, which I love, and there is a really beautiful discussion with the headmaster at the end of the book explaining why Harry Potter is indeed in the right Hogwarts house, and it wasn't a mistake not to go to Slytherin. But on the whole, just a bit meh. Entertaining, fast-paced though. I think this is sort of the last sort of quite short one in the series, and the next one that we will be reading in March is many a friend's favourite, so I'm looking forward to that. Then I read Laufen by Isabel Bogdan, which is a German book, and I thought it was really, really good. I struggle to read German literature quite often, and this one should have been a struggle because it has these very long, meandering stream of consciousness sentences while our main protagonist starts running, Laufen, again, to work through the grief of her boyfriend having committed suicide. And we probably accompany the main protagonist for sort of a year. I'm not sure, no, a bit over a year. And as she progresses in fitness, she also works through this grief and comes to terms maybe with the decision that her boyfriend made and that she wasn't part of that decision. She thinks about her therapy sessions as she goes running. I really, really like this. It's not the easiest book to read for someone who's not a German native, in my opinion, because of these very long sentences, and Germans love their little commas and long sentences. So that, take that caveat. But I thought in its craft, this was very good, and the author has written another book, Der Pfau, I believe, the peacock, which I now also want to check out. I really enjoyed Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola, which is a collection of short stories, love stories from around the world. What I didn't realise was that they are all retellings, all of them. I thought that they would be original stories just set in different parts of the world, but Bolu Babalola has taken traditional stories, myths, classic love stories, and retold them in a modern world setting. Yes, they are from different parts of the country. Yes, these stories also originate from different countries, but they are all retellings, and I thought they were so sweet. We have a lot of happily ever afters, HEAs, in here, without it being sort of too cloying, sickly, formulaic as a lot of sort of modern romance stories are. I liked having a bit more of a diverse set of protagonists. It is quite a heteronormative book, but I did like the sort of quite typical setup in these stories of following sort of fierce, passionate, smart, strong women who fall in love with men that can deal with that and don't try to change them or put them down or make them quieter or smaller, but they like them for their intelligence and their specialness. So I did think these were great stories. The tagline, mythical tales from around the world retold, could have tipped me off. But if you haven't checked this one out and you fancy a short story collection, I really recommend this one. Then I have a German non-fiction book here called Gib mir mal die Hautfarbe, written by two authors, Olalu Fajembola and Tebogo Niminde Dundadenga, two German female authors who started an online store selling more diversely minded toys, books, things for children. And this book is almost like an instructional manual of how to talk to children about racism. Not just how to talk about racism, but also how to bring up children to be more attuned to issues around racism, and to maybe also give them more confidence and a tool set to fight against racism. This is a bit of a weird pick for me, but it was recommended by a friend and I thought it was interesting and timely, and I read very little on this topic geared towards the German market. So I thought this was really interesting because quite often I find myself knowing what kind of vocabulary to use in the English setting, but in German I quite often don't know how acronyms are pronounced or just what the most appropriate or kind vocabulary is, and I do want to use it correctly. So there are some notes on vocabulary in the beginning of the book, and then it just goes on to sort of examples that you may encounter when talking to children. The authors briefly mention their own upbringing. There's a little discourse on the history of black individuals in Germany, which I knew some about, but it's again not a topic that is very loud and discussed much if you predominantly read English literature. So I was really positively surprised, not because I didn't expect this to be good, but especially because I specifically could take so much with me from reading this book. And finally, keeping the best for last, I read Trumpet by Jackie Kay, which is a 5-star read for me. This is the book by a Scottish author who writes about the fictitious jazz musician Joss Moody, who after his death is found out to have been living a life as a trans man. And his wife and son work through their grief while loads of people and very few people try to also deal with this big scandal and secret emerging after Joss Moody dies. We fall in love with him through the eyes of his wife, his son, and struggle with them as well to come to terms with how they want to talk and feel about their husband's and father's story. But what I thought was the best and special aspect of this book was that even though it discusses a topic such as transsexuality, it doesn't tell us how we should feel about it. Yes, this book at its core believes that we shouldn't be judged for our sex or gender or identification, and anyway, whose business is it really? But it's not overly preachy or moralistic or political. It's a love story, and it's the story of a person making a huge mark in musical culture and how people just miss this person having died. Not that much happens, to be honest. This is very much a character-heavy book, but we get different chapters told from different points of view, which are, again, crafted really, really cleverly. It's not easy. It's not Coleman, chapter 20, and then we get the point of view of Joss Moody's son, but there's like an interview exclusive, and we go on and there's letters, and there are chapters where we may have to read a paragraph to see whose point of view we get. So Jackie Kay really trusts that the reader is an intelligent person who will understand the main plot of the book, and I really commend her for that. All in all, I just love how much of a mixed bag my February reading was, with 2 non-fiction, a short story collection, 2 German books, a horror, a classic, a reread, so many good books. So you can run out and see if you want to read any of them. Make it Trumpet, if I'm going to advise you anything. I hope you had a really good February reading month as well. I'm really discovering the joy of buddy reading. 3 out of these 8 were buddy reads, and I'm currently in the middle of one as well. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye everyone.